It's a weeknight. Nothing dramatic about it. You're driving home from work, radio low, mind already on dinner. And in your mirror, blue and red, you indicate, you pull onto the shoulder, you wind the window down, and you do what almost every decent person does in that moment. You get ready to be helpful. And the officer walks up, torch in hand, and he's warm. Genuinely warm. "Evening, mate." And then he asks you something so ordinary, so conversational, that it barely registers as a question at all. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And your brain, trying to be useful, trying to be cooperative, starts doing exactly what it was trained to do since you were a kid talking to a teacher. It starts guessing out loud. Stop. Because that little question, and two others just like it that are coming later in this video, are not small talk. They are three of the most reliable tools in the entire roadside playbook. They are asked politely, on purpose, in that order, because they work on good people far better than they work on guilty ones. And by the end of this video, you will never answer any of them the same way again. I'm Ray Mercer. For close to 19 years, I've worked in and around courtrooms and police stations right across this country, from Sydney down to Melbourne and up into Queensland, watching ordinary people talk themselves into trouble they never needed to have. And I want to say this clearly before we go any further, because I say it in every one of these videos and I mean it every time. Most police officers are decent people doing a genuinely hard job. This isn't about treating them as the enemy. This is about the handful of moments where a friendly voice is doing legal work, and you deserve to recognize it when it happens. A quick note too, this is general legal education for Australia, not legal advice for your specific situation, and our laws are genuinely state-based. So where it matters, I'll flag the differences between New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. So why do good, honest, law-abiding people fall for this? Because the entire trap is built on the exact things that make you a decent person. You don't want to seem difficult. You don't want the officer thinking you've got something to hide. You're a little nervous, because who wouldn't be with lights flashing behind them, and nervous people fill silence. So when a friendly question lands, your instinct is to answer it fully, warmly, and fast, because that's what cooperative people do with each other. And here's the thing you need to hold on to for the rest of this video. Being nervous is not evidence of anything. Talking too much is what turns nothing into something. Think about the shape of the whole encounter for a second, because it's designed this way, whether the officer even realizes it consciously or not. A friendly tone lowers your guard far more effectively than an aggressive one ever could. Aggression makes people defensive and careful with their words. Warmth makes people relax and want to be liked, and a driver who wants to be liked will happily fill every silence, answer every question, and agree to almost anything just to keep the mood pleasant. That's not a character flaw in you. It's simply how humans are wired around other humans, and a trained officer knows it. None of this means the officer is acting in bad faith. Plenty of the time, these are simply habitual questions asked out of routine, not calculation. But the effect on you is the same either way, and your response should be the same either way too. Let's take the first one properly, because it's the one almost every single driver in this country has heard. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" It sounds like the officer wants a conversation. It is actually an invitation to confess. Think about what happens the moment you start guessing. Was it my speed? Was one of my taillights out? Did I roll through that stop sign back there? In trying to be helpful, you may hand the officer an admission to an offense he wasn't even certain about yet, on his body-worn camera, in your own words, before he's told you a single fact. Under the Uniform Evidence Law that applies across most of this country, including Section 89 of the Evidence Act 1995 in New South Wales, your silence cannot be used against you as if it were a confession, but your words absolutely can be. So the answer to "do you know why I pulled you over" is never a guess. It's simply, "No, officer, I'm not sure. Can you tell me why you've stopped me?" Polite, warm, complete. You've given nothing away, and the burden sits back where it always belonged, on him to tell you. Second question, and this one tends to arrive a minute or two later, once you're both a bit more relaxed. "Where are you coming from tonight?" or "Where are you headed?" It sounds like the most natural small talk in the world. It is not. Every detail you volunteer becomes something that can be checked, questioned, or used to build a picture. Maybe you say you're coming from a mate's house and you had one beer 3 hours ago. Maybe you say you're heading to see someone at an address the officer finds interesting for reasons that have nothing to do with you. None of it is illegal to say, but none of it is required either, and every extra sentence is a thread that a trained investigator can quietly pull on later. Here's the distinction that matters more than anything else in this entire video, and I want you to actually remember it, not just hear it. There is a short list of things you must give a police officer at a roadside stop in Australia, and everything else sits on a much longer list of things you never have to answer. The must list is your name and address, and if you're the driver, your license and proof you're entitled to be driving that vehicle. That obligation comes from state road transport laws, the Road Transport Act 2013 in New South Wales, the Road Safety Act 1986 in Victoria, and the Transport Operations Road Use Management Act 1995 in Queensland. Refuse those, and you're refusing a lawful requirement, and that's a real problem. But where you've been, where you're going, who you were with, and what you were doing, that's the never have to list. So the answer here, warm and unbothered, is something like, I'd rather not get into where I've been if that's all right, but here's my license. Third question, and this is the one with the biggest teeth, because it isn't really a question about you at all. It's a question about your car. Do you mind if I have a quick look in the vehicle? Or sometimes softer still, what's in the back there? Mind if I check? This sounds like the officer is simply being thorough. What he's actually doing in a huge number of cases is trying to get from you the one thing the law otherwise requires him to establish on his own. Here's the cold legal truth underneath it. Under the Law Enforcement Powers and Responsibilities Act, known as LEPRA in New South Wales, and its equivalent under the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act 2000 in Queensland, an officer cannot simply search your vehicle because you seem nervous, or because it's late, or because he'd like to see what's inside. He needs what the law calls reasonable suspicion, a genuine, articulable, fact-based reason, not a hunch, not a feeling. The courts have said this plainly. In the case of R versus Rondo, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal made clear that reasonable suspicion has to sit on real facts, more than a mere possibility, but less than an actual belief of guilt. That's a real legal bar the officer has to clear on his own evidence, but consent is a shortcut clean around that entire bar. The moment you say, yeah, sure, go ahead, none of that matters anymore. You've just given him a lawful search that he might never have otherwise been entitled to conduct, and you cannot take that yes back once it's given. And it's worth knowing what a genuine escalation looks like too, because that's where the state differences become important. If you say I don't consent to a search and the officer searches anyway, you do not physically resist, ever. Resisting turns a legal argument you might win later into an actual criminal charge you will almost certainly lose today. What you do instead is stay perfectly calm and say clearly, for the record, I do not consent to this search, and then you let it happen and you remember every detail, the time, the location, the officer's name, and station. If the search genuinely wasn't backed by reasonable suspicion, that's not a fight you win on the roadside. It's one you win afterwards, through a formal complaint or in court, where an unlawfully obtained search can sometimes see evidence excluded entirely. And this is exactly where the state-by-state nature of our law matters, because reasonable suspicion isn't defined identically everywhere. New South Wales relies on LEPRA and the Rondo test I mentioned. Victoria's search powers sit under different provisions again with their own case law, and Queensland sit under the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act with its own thresholds. The detail shifts slightly from state to state, but the core principle doesn't move an inch anywhere in this country. An officer needs a genuine, fact-based reason or your consent, and nothing else will do. Now, while we're here, I want to correct something that trips up a lot of Australians who've watched a few too many American shows, because it genuinely matters and it cuts the other way. In places like the United States and the United Kingdom, an officer generally needs some reason to suspect alcohol before he can require a breath test. In Australia, that is simply not how it works. Under our random breath testing laws in every state, an officer can require you to blow into that device with no suspicion at all, for no reason whatsoever, as a matter of routine. That part is not a trick and it is not optional, and refusing a lawful breath test is its own separate offense. So don't confuse the 3 friendly questions we're covering today, which are genuinely optional, with a random breath test, which genuinely is not. Knowing which is exactly what keeps you calm and correct in the moment instead of accidentally digging in on the wrong hill. So let's put the whole thing together, because I promised you something you could actually use, not just understand. You don't need 3 separate speeches memorized for 3 separate moments. You need one calm, layered response you can lean on the whole way through the stop, adjusting it slightly as each question lands. It starts with warmth, because warmth costs you nothing, and it keeps the whole encounter easy for both of you. Good evening, officer. Happy to help. When he asks if you know why you were stopped, you say, "No, I'm not sure. Could you tell me why?" When he drifts into where you've been or where you're going, you say, "I'd rather not get into that if that's all right, but here's my license and my details." And if he asks to have a look in the car, you say it plainly, and without any edge at all, "I don't consent to a search, officer." That's it. 3 moments, 1 steady tone, nothing rude, nothing withheld that you were ever required to give. And I want to walk you through how that actually plays out, because hearing it flow matters more than reading it as separate lines. Blue lights, you pull over, window down, hands resting on the wheel. "Evening, mate, license please." You hand it over. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, I'm not too sure, sorry." "What was it?" "One of your indicators isn't working properly." "Ah, thanks for letting me know, I'll get that sorted." "Where are you headed tonight?" "I'd rather not get into where I'm going if that's all right. Is everything okay with the license?" "Yeah, that's fine. Mind if I just check inside the car while we're here?" "I don't consent to a search, but I'm happy to answer anything else." A short pause. "That's all right. Get that indicator fixed. Drive safe." And you do. Notice what didn't happen. No argument, no raised voice, no drama for the dash cam. Just a calm, cooperative driver who handed over everything the law actually required and quietly declined everything it didn't. Now picture the other version, because I've sat across from both kinds of people in my career, and only one of them ever needed to. Same street, same officer, same 3 friendly questions, a different driver entirely. He gets asked if he knows why he was stopped, and because he wants to seem cooperative, he starts guessing, maybe it was my speed back there, I might have been doing a bit over. He's just handed over an admission the officer didn't have a minute earlier. Asked where he's coming from, he explains the whole evening, who he was with, what they were doing, entirely unprompted. And when he's asked if the officer can have a look in the car, he says, "Yeah, sure, go for it, nothing to hide," because refusing feels rude. 20 minutes later, he's standing on the verge while his car gets properly searched, a search that may never have been lawful on its own, and every word from that friendly chat is sitting in the officer's notes. Same driver, same innocence, same car. The only thing that changed between his evening and the calm version I just walked you through was which of those 3 questions he treated as compulsory when none of them were. I want to leave you with the one thought that ties this entire video together, because it's the belief sitting underneath every single one of these questions, and it's the belief the whole trap depends on. It's the idea that if you've got nothing to hide, you should just answer everything, agree to everything, and get it over with quickly to prove you're one of the good ones. I understand exactly where that instinct comes from. It's decent, and it's completely human, but answering every question and consenting to every request are not the price of being innocent. They were never required of you in the first place. The people who end up with the longest, worst version of a routine stop are almost never the guilty ones who knew to stay quiet. They're the honest, helpful people who talked because staying calm and brief felt, in the moment, like it might look suspicious. It never does. Being polite and being thorough about your rights were never opposites, and you can be both at once, every single time. If this helped you see something you hadn't noticed before, do one simple thing for me. Send it to somebody you actually care about. A parent who still answers every question out of habit, a young driver who's never been pulled over before, a mate who thinks this stuff only matters if you've done something wrong. One of them is going to get those blue lights behind them on an ordinary night, tired, caught off guard, wanting to be helpful. And the only difference between a 90-second stop and a much longer, much worse evening is knowing which of these friendly little questions was ever actually a requirement in the first place. I'm Ray Mercer. Stay calm, stay polite, and know exactly where that line sits before you're the one on the side of the road.